Our next speaker is Sid Stetson, who will be presenting on how less than ideal water chemistry affects the health of your system and animals. Sid Stetson is the senior aquarist of the Aquatic Animal Health Program at Hatfield Marine Science Center in Newport, Oregon. He became a hobbyist at the age of 10 after being entranced by the undersea world of Jacques Cousteau. I think we all probably have gone there, which introduced the vibrant colors and animals of a world very different from the rolling hills of western Illinois where he grew up. After many years of managing professional kitchens as a chef in Chicago, he decided to turn that avocation into a career by enrolling in the Aquarium Science Program, AQS, at Oregon Coast Community College. He was offered a position at HMSC while working on his degree, which became a permanent position after he graduated. Today, Sid oversees the husbandry team and the diverse collection of animals of a world-class marine science facility and works for renowned aquatic veterinarian Dr. Tim. Sid and his team work closely with AQS students as well as veterinary students from across the country, helping them gain working knowledge of water chemistry and the many other facets of aquatic animal health. He also serves on the faculty of the AQS program and is a frequent guest lecturer for several courses. Please help me in welcoming Sid Stetson to the stage.
Good morning, and thank you for the warm welcome. This morning, I'm going to be talking about a lot of water chemistry parameters that you are all very familiar with. But instead of telling you what you already know, what I intend to do is provide a different context for this information so that you have a better understanding of what is going on from a physiological standpoint with the health of your animals and your system when your water quality parameters start to go a little sideways. When I was beginning to gather my thoughts to put this presentation together, I thought, what are the primary reasons that people leave the hobby? And it turns out that number 3 is your life circumstances change. New job, new baby, this sort of thing. Number 2 is, of course, financial considerations, because we all have to live under some type of budgetary tyranny, right? And the primary driver that people leave this hobby is tank crashes, which we are all distressingly familiar with, right? So life support component failures, catastrophic tank failures, animal losses including disease outbreaks, dead and dying fish, dead and dying corals and other invertebrates. And I'm going to try to cover quite a bit of information in the next 45 or 50 minutes so that I can leave you guys plenty of time to ask questions if you have them. All right, so let me get into this. So as we all know, the learning curve can be mighty steep and unforgiving, but there are many disease outbreaks and mortalities that can be avoided with proper quarantine, proactive husbandry, and good water chemistry. So I would like to begin this presentation this morning by talking about gill tissue because it is such an instrumental, foundational part of the health of our aquatic animals. And lousy water chemistry or lousy conditions in general tend to have a profoundly negative impact on this tissue. And so I thought a quick review of how gill function works. And everybody knows, of course, that these animals, our animals, use gills for respiration. But many of you also know that there's an awful lot more going on than gas exchange with this tissue. Primarily, the countercurrent exchange across gill tissue. Nature always finds the most efficient ways of doing things, right? So we can go pretty far down the rabbit hole pretty quickly on this stuff, but the salient point that I want to get across as the simplest explanation is countercurrent exchange works with onboarding dissolved oxygen from the water and offloading ammonia, and in our marine animals, salts, for example, as well as some other substances. But it is a marvelously efficient system that is very easily disrupted by improper water chemistry. So let's begin by talking a little bit more about the infrastructure of gill tissue, beginning with the gill arch. And you can see a gill arch here with the primary lamellae arranged on the arch, the infrastructure itself, as well as the gill rakers, and there's a small section, cross-section there. And then we take a closer look at the primary lamellae, if the clicker will allow. There we go. This is a gill biopsy of healthy lamellar tissue. You can see how it looks very full and lush and well oxygenated. And then we'll do a deeper dive here and take a look at the secondary lamellae with this electron microscope photograph here, and you can see that this system is built on, the efficiency of this system is built on surface area to a large extent. And looking at this picture, this image of the secondary lamellae there, you can imagine, and I will show in some slides here coming up, just how disruptive lousy water chemistry is to this exquisitely sensitive and specialized tissue. So gill tissue is highly specialized and vascularized. There are between tens and hundreds of thousands of individual lamellae in a marine animal based on the habitat, the size of the animal, the swimming style and speed, and some other considerations. They're optimized for maximum surface area. They are easily damaged by poor water quality, leading to hypertrophy, and hyperplasia, which is enlargement of the gill tissue. Either conditions result in impaired gill function through changes in the shape and the efficiency of the tissue itself. And the rest of the information is there, and particularly of interest to us all is that this tissue is highly attractive to parasites. It is highly vascularized by its very nature. And so a lot of these hitchhikers that we go round and round with find this very attractive tissue indeed. There's a couple of the usual suspects there. There's a fluke, and in the next image there are amyludinium trophonts. And so this morning, I'm going to be talking about unionized ammonia, nitrites, nitrates, and hypo and hyperthermia. And again, here's a couple of shots of gill tissue that has been compromised by poor water chemistry. In these cases, this is a condition called telangiectasis, which is a dilation or enlargement of the capillaries, and you can see that in the red bulbs that appear at the ends of the tissue there. This photograph was taken from an animal that was suffering from unionized ammonia toxicity. So the health effects of elevated unionized ammonia, and you can see the sublethal and the lethal levels there. Oftentimes, this is presented in our animals as excitability. When things get really ugly, we will see red streaking on the fins and gill inflammation, like you saw in the telangiectasis there in the previous slide. The capillaries becoming congested and dilated, erratic movement, labored respiration, chronic osmoregulatory stress with sustained levels, decreased dissolved oxygen in the blood, stunted growth, decreased immunocompetence, and that is a common theme for every one of these. The decreased efficiency of the animal's immune system, making them much more predisposed to parasites and bacterial infections and so forth. Impaired biofilter performance is another byproduct of unionized ammonia in the system, which sets the table for ever worsening water quality, leading to massive losses of fish and invertebrates. So here's an image, a couple of images. I'm going to put them side by side. So on the left, you can see this is healthy lamellar tissue again, and on the right, you can see that tissue that has been secondary lamellar tissue that has been badly damaged by unionized ammonia poisoning. You can see how the secondary lamellae are fused and stunted. So an efficient system that works, of course, on maximum surface area is now significantly less efficient and profoundly stressful for the animal. And when we're working with aquarium science students, this would be myself and my other colleagues in the Aquatic Animal Health Program, when we're working with aquarium science students and veterinary students that want to add aquatic animals to their practice, we stress the importance of anticipating, identifying, and eradicating stressors as much as possible, because these stressors, they mount, stress upon stress upon stress. So for example, when you're taking home an animal from a pet store, you have capture stress, you have transport stress, you have acclimation stress, and you have some of these other stressors. Sometimes it's conspecific or intraspecific aggression for the new guy. And so we stress the importance of being able to identify and proactively manage these stressors. And one of the most powerful stressors of all, as you guys all know, is less than ideal water chemistry, which is a polite way of saying lousy water chemistry. In the next couple of images here, you can see a couple of microscope photographs of secondary lamellae. On the right this time, you can see the healthy, feathery, healthy-looking secondary lamellae there. And on the right, you can see how this incredibly delicate tissue becomes fused and much less efficient. This is what is going on when we get these ammonia spikes, unionized ammonia spikes in our systems. So the health effects of unionized ammonia on our inverts. As we all know, most inverts, I would say almost all inverts, are exquisitely sensitive to unionized ammonia in our water. They have fewer means of mitigating this, and as a result, we end up with a sad litany of bullet points that you can all see and many of us are very familiar with, much more so than we would like, right? So the health effects of nitrite poisoning on fishes. Generally, this is something that is more of a problem in freshwater systems, and the simplest explanation for this is that for our marine fishes, nitrites are outcompeted by chlorides in saltwater at the active transfer site across gill tissue. But I also know that many of you also have freshwater systems. So in our freshwater tanks, and to a lesser extent in marine systems, nitrite poisoning in gill tissue is often called brown blood disease because the nitrites will oxidize units of hemoglobin in the blood to methemoglobin, which is a much less efficient carrier of oxygen, resulting in a very familiar litany of bullet points is here as well, which is labored respiration, lethargy, piping at the surface, poor food response, reduced immunocompetence, that's a familiar theme, and enhanced opportunity for pathogen outbreaks like that monogenean fluke you see there in the image. And here's a couple of more slides. Again, on the left, you see primary and secondary lamellae there, which is quite healthy, great separation between the secondary lamellae. This tissue is functioning quite optimally. And then on the right, you can see this hyperplasia going on. And so a significantly reduced efficiency in this tissue, again, resulting in animal stress. the fused secondary lamellae, as I mentioned, hyperplasia, and visibly disrupted tissue, resulting in chronic stress and a reduced ability to offload carbon dioxide. And here's an image of a freshwater animal that is suffering from, this is a classic presentation of brown blood disease from nitrite poisoning. And so contrast this brown, unhealthy looking tissue with the bright pink, full, and turgid lamellae that we were looking at earlier. Moving on, the health effects of nitrite poisoning on inverts. Inverts are acutely sensitive to nitrates. Any level detectable by common testing methods will quickly result in tissue degradation and reduction, dangerously impaired respiration, increased likelihood of bacterial infections and other pathogen infections, and significant animal losses. As well as that horrible feeling that we all are way too familiar with when you see that your animals are sick and they're in heaps of trouble, and you start trying to figure out what you're going to do about it. So health effects of elevated nitrate levels. Generally speaking, elevated levels of 40 milligrams per liter or 40 parts per million and above indicate old tank syndrome, which to one extent or an ever-increasing extent will result in labored respiration. Gill tissue is often less permeable to nitrite than unionized ammonia and nitrite, but can still lead to light brown to brown gills in extreme cases. As we all know, elevated nitrate levels lead to rapid blooms of diatoms, dinoflagellates, cyanobacteria, and algae. Freshwater fish tend to be more susceptible to nitrate poisoning, generally speaking, but corals and some reef fishes are more acutely affected by nitrate poisoning. Impacts of nitrates on inverts. Levels above 10 milligrams per liter usually result in increasingly impaired calcification for building skeletons and shells, reduced skeletal density. As you all know, brittle skeletons are much more likely to break. They're increasingly fragile. And again, the increased likelihood of pathogen outbreaks for bacteria, protozoans, and the usual list of suspects that we all keep a very close eye on. So hyperthermia and animal health. Excuse me? Certainly. Sure. This is a very good question. However, it's going to be very specific and also affected by other factors, of course. But generally speaking, for marine systems, we all keep a very close eye on this number, and we want to keep that number as close to less than 2 parts per million as possible. I'm trying not to sound evasive on your question, but it's a broad, difficult question to give a more precise answer to. But generally speaking, Certainly. I expected to have my laptop before me in this morning, so I didn't have to spend quite so much time looking right and left. I apologize for that, but I do not. So because I'm moving through these slides fairly quickly, I'm going to allow questions while I'm doing the presentation rather than waiting until the end. Does anyone else have any questions right now?
I know you said 2 parts per million. What about 10 parts per million? I'm having a really difficult time staying anywhere near 2.
Well, everyone's mileage may vary, right? And there are circumstances that we can control in this regard, and there are a whole bunch more that we cannot. But then 10 seems to work. But and again, I think I've modified everything by saying generally speaking, right? But what works for you? What works for your systems and your animals? That works. So just do what we all do. Is like, okay, well, things seem to be just fine. So that works for me. Any other questions before I move on? All right. So impacts of nitrates on inverts. Oh, excuse me. I believe I went through this already. So hyperthermia and animal health. Hyperthermia is just another fancy way of saying elevated temperatures in our systems, right? So an animal's ability to withstand temperature increases is largely species specific, and it is also highly dependent on the fitness of the animal when this condition occurs, of course. You know, how good are some of the other water quality parameters for existence? How is the animal getting the right kind of food in the right amounts? Are there other factors? Of course, there are other factors that factor into that, but to put it very simply, when we're working with AQS students and veterinary students, we impress upon them the importance of staying out in front of these things as best as you can, and these things would include, you know, good water chemistry, good nutrition, proactively monitoring and identifying and eradicating different sorts of compounding stressors, and so forth. And so when these things break loose, when a small child pulls a temperature sensor out of the sump, for example, or a heater fails outright, or all of the other dozens of reasons that these things occur, and they occur to us all, professionals alike, every once in a while. The significant difference for professionals is that we have a lot more options and resources available to us when things start to go sideways than many hobbyists. So generally speaking, increases in water temperature above normal ranges result in gradual or occasionally rapid increases in metabolic rates. And if you think about how we feel when we're working outside on a hot day, and we feel overheated, if things continue, sometimes we'll get very lightheaded or nauseous or things like that. Now imagine not being able to mitigate that in any way at all. There's just no escape from it. So again, if the aforementioned catastrophic event happens and temps get into the upper 80s or something like that, the table is set for a number of bad things for our animals, including the usual litany of decreased immunocompetence, for example, rapid and shallow respiration, and the greatly increased likelihood of pathogen outbreaks. In this picture here, you see, here is an animal that has rubbed itself or flashed against a hard object in order to dislodge ectoparasites. This is something that happened after a hyperthermia event. This happened several days. This beautiful little fish was in a quarantine system that we had a heater fail on, and we had been bringing the temperature down gradually, and then we started to notice that this animal was flashing, and it was trying to dislodge these flukes, it turned out. And as you can see, this is pretty catastrophic damage here. So not only has it displaced the mucus layer, it has also displaced a number of different scales, and now it is in past the dermis and down into the muscle tissue, so the table is set for all sorts of secondary infections. And this animal was in heaps of trouble. Again, professionals have a lot more resources at our disposal to turn an animal like this around, not the least of which is having a world-class aquatic veterinarian to consult with. But pathogen outbreaks can adjust to higher temps. Pathogens in general, can adjust to higher temps and much more quickly than our fishes can. And so when one of the events happens, we need to quickly identify and start proactively managing stressors to give these animals any chance to come back around. Did you have a question? Okay. Anyone else have any questions before I move on? So hyperthermia, or when the opposite happens, when temperatures become too cool in a system. Generally, fish and invertebrates tolerate temperature drops better than increases, but as always, tolerance varies widely by species and the rate of temperature loss. Lower temps can often result in, and this follows logic very well, right? Lethargy, poor food response, reduced respiration rates, acute or chronic stress if the condition persists over time, reduced immunocompetence, there's that condition again, and the increased likelihood of pathogen outbreaks after the temperatures improve, as well as increased susceptibility to secondary fungal infections, which is what you see in this image here. In most cases, fungal infections like this are secondary to some type of primary insult, like the animal begins flashing to dislodge ectoparasites, or there's some type of trauma that the animal has withstood by its habitat, or conspecific aggression, or other causes. So when you start seeing fungal growths on your animals, a lot of times it is secondary to the initial insult. So revisiting the healthy system and healthy animals concept, you guys have been hearing about this for a very long time, and you read about it over and over again, but I find it very helpful to revisit this for us all, professionals and hobbyists alike, because these are the foundational concepts that help prepare your animals to better withstand the sorts of adverse events that I have been describing, and many others that you are all very familiar with. Hopefully not very familiar with, but we're all familiar with it to one extent or another. So there are a lot of aspects of aquarium care that are foundational for promoting system and animal health, such as appropriate diets and in the right amounts. Something that we stress with our students and ourselves within our husbandry team is it is ridiculously easy to overfeed a system. We get into habits, we get into routines. I feed nori on Tuesday and I feed a full sheet or things like that, but it's something that is worth revisiting over and over again, because you always want to be taking a hard, critical look at what you're feeding, the quality of what you're feeding, the age of what you're feeding, and how much of it, because as we all know, any nutrients that you introduce into a system, you're going to have to account for one way or the other with increased filtration, increased maintenance, something or other, something like that. And it's good for us all to be reminded of that, and some of these other, and all of these other bullets at one point or another. So good system design with adequate turnover rates. Generally speaking, you want to be able to turn over the entire volume of the system at least once per hour, and in many of our systems, we design and build them so that that happens many more times, so that our water is rapidly passing through our filtration and getting as polished as we can be, because surely we are all invested in the health of our systems and animals. Proactive maintenance. This is also something that you folks are all very familiar with. We all want to stay on top of these things as best we can. But there are also mitigating life circumstances. The game is on, all of a sudden I'm going to do a water change this weekend. Well, all of a sudden there's an extra ticket for a game, and yes, I'm going to the game. Or a kid gets sick, or there's an emerging crisis, or any one of thousands of other reasons why we aren't able to do the planned maintenance on our system. So again, proactive maintenance and the importance of it, that kind of speaks for itself, right? So the better we are able to proactively manage the health of our systems, the better we are able to proactively manage the health of all of our animals living in them. Bioloads scaled properly to the volume of the system. And this is also a point that we reinforce over and over again when working with students, because, every one of us has gone to the pet store and seen some fish that we simply must have because it's gorgeous, it's something that we can afford, and we think, you know what, that's going to look really good in my reef display. And a lot of times that one grazer or this fish or that kind of gets us past the tipping point for the bioload, for the health of the system, and then we start dealing with bacterial blooms and cyano outbreaks that we just simply cannot turn the corner on. And usually one of the last things that we think about when we're trying to work this problem is removing an animal or two from the system and giving the system time to recover. And I've spoken with colleagues that say, man, I just can't get around the corner on this bacterial bloom or cyano. I work on this, I spend all kinds of time trying to eradicate this stuff, and it just will not go away. And eventually it's like, well, maybe the bioload is just too much. It doesn't seem like it would be too much for the volume of the system and the turnover rates and the quality of the filtration and so forth, but sometimes it is the simplest things that are the most easily overlooked. Another fundamental that you are all very familiar with, in fact, many of you can whip out your phones right now and check out the params and watch how the trends go on your tank, so you're looking for anomalies in these graphs and so forth. But good, stable, and documented water chemistry parameters so that you can pick out, as I just mentioned, these anomalous spikes and blips in our numbers to say, what exactly is going on there? Was that because I just did an extra heavy feed this week? Or where is that wrasse again? Or that sort of thing. But it is, again, it is good for us all to revisit these points every now and then. I would like to thank Dr. Tim Miller-Morgan, Dr. Kevin Erickson, and the Marine Aquarium Societies of North America. Thank you very much for your kind attention this morning.